Okay, good evening, everyone. This is Abhivardhan from the Indian Society of AI and Law, and in collaboration with the Data Science and AI Association of Australia, we're hosting a very crucial joint session. You can also call it like a committee session, technically, because it comes under the Policy Innovation Committee of ISAIL. However, this is a joint session that we are doing. So, in that regard, as this recording has begun for today, who am I? Well, I'm a technology law specialist, but I'm somebody also who loves the concept of Indo-Pacific, and that fascinates me a lot, personally speaking. Now, why are we convening here? Why are we having this session? And who are the speakers for today? Well, um, this is a unique session in its own right because um, we are today discussing some new, fresh Indo-Pacific perspectives. Now, why are we doing that? So if I remember, I think it was 2023 end, and when we had Christina Van Bergen from the European Union, Pavitra Manivanan from XKDR, Bogdan was also there, if I'm right. If I'm right, Shisha Chaudhary from Thomson Reuters, and I was there. And we had a very fascinating session on Indo-Pacific perspectives of AI governance back in December 2023. Yeah, and I think it was that time and we had started discussing like after Bletchley declaration and all the whole thing about AI safety, which was starting at that time. What could be a way to understand AI governance right now? And I find it pretty fascinating that a lot of things have changed from a commercial law point of view, if not just from a cybersecurity point of view. So Raymond from Raymond Sun, who is on LinkedIn, he is obviously very popular. I think way popular than me. He works at Herbert Smith Freehills. At the same time, he also leads with his co-partners what he calls the esteemed Data Science AI Association of Australia. And we were planning this for a long time. Like, should we have a session on Indo-Pacific or India-Australia perspectives? I told him that let's make it Indo-Pacific because India-Australia is a part of the Quad, are part of the Quad. So uh, we will focus on five countries this time. A little bit on China because China is obviously a very important anchor to the Indo-Pacific, howsoever geopolitically we frame it. Um, why this session is important? Well, this session is important because it requires people to understand contextually how are these Indo-Pacific countries important. Now, I will make it plainly simple why. I will not give the same jargon that government people tell and think tanks tell. I'll tell you practically why Indo-Pacific matters. So, Indo-Pacific basically means Asia, but with a more Indian Ocean vision, an India-centric and Australia-centric vision, rather than a China-led vision. But even then, China is a part of the economic equation and therefore sometimes the legal equation. Why? Because EU-China relations are still there. Therefore, there will be some cross-border data protection related realities which the Chinese have to handle and the EU has to handle. Obviously, Chinese lawyers will have a different attitude. I'm not getting on that, but data protection matters, right? So even at that tiny level of cross-border data collaboration aspects where legalities and contracts come into being, the economy is there, the EU-China economy. Same applies to US and China. Sometimes because Donald Trump has made some very irrational statements against India, people think that how does it matter from an industrial point of view? I think it matters because right now we are seeing the thing that the Indo-Pacific concept is actually coming home back again. Because the Indo-Pacific idea was thought as a European idea, Anglophone idea, and all that. But legally speaking, I think the governance updates we have seen in South Korea, Japan, India. In India, we have very few updates, close to nothing, but still some interesting things, some interesting hints, which I'll tell. Um, but it's a very interesting dynamic we are seeing right now. So I thought, you know what, I had talked with Raymond and I told him that, dude, Australia is also doing something very interesting around some AI guidance, which are non-binding rules and some AI definitions they have come up with. And that's why I find it pretty fascinating. So uh, in that regard, in that regard, um, it's interesting how the Indo-Pacific perspectives are actually shaping with some tangible value. Because before Indo-Pacific was like, okay, maritime security, anti-China, and all that stuff. Now it's like, okay, we're gonna do some strategic trade, we're gonna do some strategic digital supply collaborations. But what are those collaborations? Are there any contractual and legal issues which are associated with it? Is it also affected by the hype of LLMs? Obviously, for this, we have Bogdan here. So let me quickly introduce our speakers. One of our speakers will not be able to join, which is Tanvi Ratna, due to some unfortunate issue. But two of our speakers are on the way. Raymond Sun, obviously from DSAI. Well, issues happened, which is fine. And Dipanshu Singh from Gati, ex G20 India, and he's also a public policy advisor to the Uttar Pradesh government right now. So, quick introduction. Dipanshu Singh is somebody who is a public policy advisor to Uttar Pradesh government. He is working in Gati right now on the AI and skill side of things. Since he's also a ex-UPSC educator, he doesn't do it full time anymore. He was also ex-co-founder of an academy. He's a guy who understands international relations and now also is working hands-on on the AI and skilling realities. And also the skill market, because the Europeans are interested in India and the Indian skill market, like Indians going to Germany. So Gati is working interesting work, and I thought that Dipanshu's perspectives might be a great addition to this session. Bogdan Grigorescu, well, everyone knows Bogdan. I know Bogdan. He is the Vice President Industry Policy of ISAIL, and somebody who I really consider as a close friend. Um, we have been in touch for a long time, and Bogdan's somebody who's a technology veteran who deeply understands the failures of LLMs and the limitations of AI in the AI hype age. So obviously we have Bogdan here as well. Apart from that, obviously Raymond Sun, he is obviously a lawyer from Australia, uh, and interestingly, he's a person who um, has his own understanding around certain things when it comes to AI governance in Australia. And he has also created a global AI regulation tracker, which I personally think is an awesome achievement because he loves coding, he loves trying it. So having Raymond's perspective would be great. Apart from that, we have some people from ISAIL as well who will add some interventions wherever necessary, such as the brilliant Sankalp Srivastava, who actually works hands-on in the legal knowledge graphs and the legal tech side of things from a data-centric perspective. He has been a part of our previous sessions as well with Raymond Sun and Alexander Tulenkov and others. Bahadur Shah from ISAIL Kerala is also here with us. So we have Bahadur as well. Um, we have some other faculty members and some other people, as I understand, from LinkedIn. But we have Tamonash and Priyanshi who are rapporteurs for this session, so they might also ask some questions. And uh, we'll anyways go ahead with the session as we have planned. So as Raymond is set to join, and we have Dipanshu also who is in en route, I'll quickly discuss a little bit of an Indian perspective to put in context why does it matter for the Indo-Pacific. Now, see, one thing you have to understand that when Apple released the paper on machine learning, which is regarding the Tower of Hanoi and the limitations of large language models and reasoning models, the larger question is that even if you increase compute, even if you increase certain parameters and things, the limitations of the LLMs don't go away. Now that has ensured a huge crack in the LLM ecosystem, but it doesn't mean that the whole AI ecosystem is done over. And that has nothing to do with compute per se, because compute is a different technology altogether. But there are some economic implications in AI research, which will also affect AI safety research because your AI safety perspectives change. Now, this is the exact problem which a lot of countries are facing right now. Because when you try to come up with AI safety perspectives, it creates a sense of a dichotomy. But before that, I am happy to have Raymond. So, hey Raymond,
Hi,
hope you can
hi
hear me.
everyone. So sorry for being late. I had to rush across the entire city. I ran from my meeting to back to the office. So really appreciate your patience as yeah, really apologies on my part for being late. Yeah.
No worries, no worries. Ironically, one more speaker is a bit late, but he'll join soon.
Okay.
But
Brilliant.
coincidence today. Yeah. But I think while I was speaking that Raymond, I have introduced Raymond, but I'll introduce again. He's working at Herbert Smith Freehills, and he's one of the leaders. I would say one of the. I would say he's one of the top people in the Data Science and AI Association, leading the efforts around AI related aspects in Australia. So obviously, I think I will let Raymond speak first, but for context, as I was saying, uh, there are aspects of AI and economic law, and there are aspects of AI safety, which are very crucial in AI governance right now, and that is affecting Indo-Pacific countries, including Australia, Japan, India, and others. I will cover some Chinese and Japanese and Indian and US perspectives, since our US counterpart is not able to join for some reasons, unfortunately. Bogdan, as I said, will cover a little bit about the tech and economic side, but I think I'll first have Raymond also explain a bit about DSAI and the Australia perspective because um, the one thing which is important to understand is that Australia and UK, my experience, I might be wrong, are actually taking very unique approaches to AI governance, which are non-binding but very exploratory in their own way. But again, that is subject to questioning, and obviously we have Bogdan who will add more on his perspectives later. But I think I'll give the floor to Raymond to explain a bit about DSAI since this is a joint session between ISAIL and DSAI and his perspectives on Australia AI governance. So Raymond, here you go.
Thanks, Abhivardhan, and hi everyone. So I'm a director on the Data Science and AI Association. I'm also just a DSAI for short, and DSAI is a non-for-profit association that focuses on connecting data scientists and AI engineers through community meetups and community initiatives. One of the key things that we do is I organize monthly community meetups for the Australian data scientists and AI engineers, and we invite guest speakers to talk about what's happening in the market and let people to also network. And through that, I've also attracted a lot of big corporate sponsors like Nvidia, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, as well as investors love to come to our event to sort of meet the startup community, students, AI governance professionals, lawyers as well. And so that's something that I run on the side, and it's really helped me stay grounded to the community. I know, when it comes to AI lawyering, a lot of people tend to learn things from textbooks and video courses, but have limited knowledge on what's happening on the ground. And I feel like me being, an AI lawyer, I think it's important for me to, be grounded and understand what's happening in reality and really understand the pain points that startups all the way to big tech companies face, so that when I do deliver legal advice, I don't just deliver textbook answers, but also things that actually help them. And part of the reason why I'm in this space in the first place is because ever since primary school and high school, I've been coding as a hobby. So I like building games and websites and mobile apps. I think one of my most well-known apps is I use AI to analyze dances. So it's how synchronized dance groups are, and I use that to analyze K-pop groups and Chinese dance groups and Japanese dance groups. And I did that a lot during COVID. I was making videos, and that went viral in Asia. And then I made an app out of that. And then one of the the Japanese uh, pop companies has used my algorithm to analyze their idols. So that's one of my things. And then I've also built websites. I think my other well-known product is a website that tracks AI laws around the world. So the Global AI Regulation Tracker. It's one of the earliest trackers of its kind. And yeah, it's still in use today, updated every day. And that has also given me a very macro global understanding of AI laws. So yeah, I take pride in the fact that I look at macro. I also look at micro on the ground. So yeah.
That's actually great, and uh, I personally like your tracker, and I've spoken about it because see, everyone is coming out with AI policy trackers, and it's just my assessment that I found few helpful to me because it's like there's a saying that we can have so many trackers and so many things, but if it's not aligning to a certain form of use, then what's the purpose? I think um, value matters and not just redundant utility, and I think that's where the trackers are very important. Um, to that end, I think since we convened here to discuss industry perspectives and legal perspectives, and Raymond will be respected to legal from an Australian side of things, and obviously he has inputs on the Chinese side as well, and a bit because he has discussed on LinkedIn. Um, I will also discuss some US, Japanese, and Chinese perspectives, and I think Raymond can add better because he knows the translations and the nuance. But quickly, I'll get on the Indian side first so that we can get into the Australian side because I think that if we are talking about the Quad to begin with, I think that India Australia relations are actually very interesting. And that's because of the nature of the trade that we have with Australia, Australia's proximity with India. Um, we already have started some workings on critical technology policy also and minerals policy, which kind of affects the AI and compute side of things and sometimes AI ethics, which is why I find it interesting. So uh, that's why I'll take and make an estimation of the Indian position right now. So of course, we don't have a law, we don't have an AI law. Uh, and right now, of course, apart from the privately proposed AI law that I came up with, which was a private effort in its own right, what's happening in the Indian AI space is that right now a bill of materials has come up from the Cyber Computer Emergency Response Team of India, from the Ministry of Electronics and IT. Interestingly, they have defined a word called intended purpose, which is used all over the world when it comes to AI legislations, including the European Union's AI Act and many other legislations. Some people call it specific purpose, some people call it technical purpose, some people call it intended value. Well, but intended purpose is a definition, which is a very basic definition that there's some reason and some technical aspect why are you using an AI system. So that is a very good admission, even if non-binding from an Indian point of view, from an Indian government point of view. Which is why it becomes interesting why the Indian AI perspective is to be known. Now, right now, obviously, the Indian AI perspective hasn't evolved pretty much because India AI mission came up with a competency framework, and the competency framework has its own realities, has its own limitations. It was teaching that public officials should know about AI and AI adoption, but then it misses on certain ethical issues like duplication of policy understanding or hallucination risks, and those things are not detailed in detail discussed. Even from a capacity point of view, bureaucrats are not given a direct understanding as to how to self-learn about AI adoption because AI adoption is not a simple thing from a government point of view. It becomes pretty difficult. So from a public governance point of view, it's a hazy situation. But I think since the Bletchley Declaration, I at least have noticed, and that's why Dipanshu Singh and I published a paper for Forum of Federations. A lot of case laws on AI have come in India. Ironically, they are just around copyright, trademark, patent, very few actually, mostly those entertainment law disputes, that the copyright has been violated or, the data has not been used with consent and those kind of debates. It has not gone to the level of how SAG-AFTRA protests have been there in the US, but of course there is some concern among judges and of course attribution and personality rights is a thing right now which is being considered in case law. But AI misuse has also been. So Bogdan will find it very interesting. In Manipur High Court, a judge actually found out that I think it was some incident that a government bureaucrat got some misinformation or some, I would say, misled information in a way using an AI system, and that affected their decision making to a very small level. Even in an income tax appellate tribunal, some AI case law, AI-based fake case laws were cited, which is similar to Cole versus, I think, Wilson, the very famous case around testimonies in the U.S. District Court. I think so. In that regard, yes, case law-wise, I think nothing much has been done except the copyright situation. But what I find interesting is that um, it is too slow, but there is some interest in AI safety research like IIT Jodhpur, etc., working on it. So that gives a lot of ground in future for AI governance because AI safety research directly fuels efforts for more AI governance standards, whether binding standards to government or something which is to markets, like an ISO 42001. So that is an Indian perspective. But I think the Australian perspective is interesting for a lot of it being about guidance, definitions, and guidance approaches. And well, I obviously have followed some of the Australian approaches on this. I would say that Raymond is the best person to explain what's happened in Australia and what is happening per se from an economy point of view as well. So how does it affect Australian markets? I think Raymond, now over to you, and then I think we'll add up more. I'll take it back from you when I'll talk about US and China and Japan. So,
Yeah, thanks, Abhivardhan. So I'll probably start with the economic landscape because that will help us understand the regulatory and legal approach. So Australia is sort of like in a similar boat to Canada and New Zealand, where we're considered middle powers, advanced middle powers. So not as wealthy as US and China, but definitely within the top economies, the OECD pack. So Australia has a strong talent pool. So a lot of people studying and researching know how to code and making good ideas. But similar to sort of Canada and New Zealand's struggle is really commercialization, right? How do you take an idea from conception all the way to final product? And that has been a consistent struggle that Australia has had for many decades, ever since we started to pivot away from manufacturing to mining and now to services. Australia doesn't have has sort of left the manufacturing base aside. It's now become very much legacy tech, and so it's a matter of trying to catch up into the high tech areas, and AI is one of them. In the AI space, Australia's comparative advantage lies in, I'd say, three main subsectors. It'll be medtech and biotech, energy tech and climate tech, and also agriculture tech, given that these are very much closely aligned to Australia's existing advantages in healthcare, energy, and agriculture. So I think that has now been common consensus now. Australia's National AI Centre and our science body, the CSIRO, have released a very comprehensive report about the Australian ecosystem, which identified what I just discussed. So having that in mind, because Australia is not yet sort of like leading in AI commercialization, the approach when it comes to regulating is to ensure that you have a system that encourages idea to commercialization. And because Australia hasn't yet built a lot of high risk applications that we're actually using within government and within business, the European model approach of having these sort of high risk tier systems, the Australian government doesn't really see a need for that immediately so far. So actually, maybe I should set out what is Australia's actual status. Australia doesn't have any AI specific law yet. uh, it's in a similar boat to the UK and Canada, which has we have privacy law, copyright law, online safety law, consumer protection law, which can regulate different aspects of AI on a case by case basis. So it's very much a sector based approach, and the past few recent developments have been really just focusing on coordinating at the ethics principles level and leaving it to the regulators to sort of work it out on themselves and enforce it. So the most prominent development was the release of the AI voluntary standards, as well as a proposed set of mandatory guardrails to regulate high-risk AI. These two standards are copy and paste of each other. It's just that one is the voluntary interim version. The other one is more like proposing to become law. We still don't know if and when that will actually become law. In terms of the standards, these are very much consistent with Western style AI governance standards that we see in the ISO 42001 standards. It's pretty much a replica of that, but in high level terms. And in Australia, the main regulator is really looking at AI is the privacy regulator. So we call them the OAIC, given that personal data is like very close to being used in AI, so that's the most natural crossover. Another big regulator looking into this, the Online Safety Commissioner, our e-safety commissioner, which looks into online safety, given that a lot of the deep fake abuse and all of that and the recommendation algorithms, they're mostly in the online safety sphere. So it makes sense for that regulator to look at them. And another third one is the ACCC, which is our consumer and competition regulator, given that AI chatbots can pose consumer misleading and deceptive conduct risks. Also, the various partnerships and mergers happening among AI companies that can pose competition risks. So, like, you probably, like, someone from the UK and Canada will probably also say very similar things. Australia is sort of like in that bucket as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was just not able to unmute, but yeah, I think yes, I think that's why I found certain Australian initiatives a little bit similar with the UK ones in that regard. Because um, first of all, I think yes, I think competition risks is a problem right now from a resource point of view among AI companies, and I think that's a very valid point. Even right now in India, it's a thing which is being an issue of concern when it comes to certain India Inc. and certain big tech companies. Of course, we had a digital competition bill, but then nothing happened because on the concept of threshold, the quantitative aspect, nothing was being clearly understood. But that is again a legislative question, and again, those things can be addressed. Maybe because it was a very high level committee of some of the most top law firms and some of the most important Indian players like Zomato, Paytm, Meta, X, led by Elon Musk, and so many players had participated from public policy. So well, India is India. That is a unique situation. But now I would kind of like to discuss the US, China, Japan perspective. And I think I'll discuss the China one a little bit in the end so that you can add up on the China part. But I'll discuss the US one. So, unfortunately, due to work reasons and all, I am not as fast as a lot of people on LinkedIn to come up with a policy document and analyze, and work reasons and personal reasons sometimes keep me busy. But I actually had a glance at the AI action plan of the Trump administration, and it has some merits. It has some very interesting language, apart from how the POTUS behaves in public, politically speaking. So I am interested in the text itself and not obviously the rhetoric, because even on copyright and all, I had written that the US approach on copyright is very interesting because they are already saying in the memorandum of the POTUS executive office that they wish to emphasize that IP rights are regarded contractually speaking. Obviously, that is a very hard thing to do, but again, not a bad step. A little bit practical step. Um, Vendor lock-in is to be addressed contractually, which is a very interesting move for an administration which is thought to be very, very pro. Because again, then if we go to Biden administration, we can say the same thing from an AI safety point of view. Even the great AI genius Andrew Ng pointed that out. But I think it's the same position, whether the Biden or Trump position. I think the difference is the Biden position was just more about too much safety regulation, like model weight should be the threshold and all those. So those things, which again, I think don't work necessarily. But I'll share my screen quickly because I kind of got some quotations and I'll quickly discuss them because I thought, that's a better approach to discuss rather than just um, discuss for the sake of it. So just one more second. Just ensuring that the screen is visible clearly. There we go. Again, on the China side, I might not have covered everything. So obviously, that is one thing I would, I mean, say a little bit sorry about, but I can assure that other perspectives are definitely covered. So I'll just confirm when I share the screen quickly. Um, and here we go. Yep. I think the screen should be visible, Raymond. Bogdan?
Yep, can see.
Is
Yep.
it visible? Awesome. Just some of the quotations so that I can quickly add up some interesting AI safety perspectives that I kind of realized from a data protection point of view or the economic ideology behind it. First, I found the most interesting quotation was the open source game altogether. Now, there's a very interesting analysis by Devansh, which showed that open source AI systems are very costly to make. But even if open source systems are leveraged with better licensing approaches, like that they happen on Hugging Face and GitHub, then it's not a bad idea, honestly, for companies, right? And AI innovators. Even because you can sit in New Delhi or Mumbai or Lucknow, you can partner with somebody in Seattle, and maybe that person can partner with someone like Raymond or somebody from New South Wales, and that guy can partner with somebody from Malaysia, and they can create an AI project and they can apply to YC. Maybe they have all the rights that they have if they follow some licensing mechanism, right? So the concept of licensing is something which is like a social contract. It's a sense that developers have it together. So I found it interesting when the administration said in the action plan that open source and open weight models could become global standards, which is interesting. They also saw that computing power should be considered a thing, large scale computing, but then again, their focus is on the financial sector. Again, Perplexity tried something. I'm not going to comment much on it, but well, I think the data center compute equation is very different. I'll not discuss that because everyone discusses compute. One more effort I found interesting is launching specific for domain specific efforts. I'm highlighting this, such as like NIST is interesting because NIST, we had analyzed something called their adversarial ML standards, like how exactly adversarial machine learning happens in cybersecurity, how it affects, what are the threats that happen. So they created a taxonomy around it, very practical actually. I think they were Biden era based, but they're still very practical. We know that the US Copyright Office Part 3 document of Pearl Mutter, before she was fired, she actually made very practical points that compulsory licensing is not possible. But again, attribution issues remain, and it might become an antitrust issue. So, from a data scraping point of view, but I'll not discuss copyright that much. Everyone discusses. One more aspect which I found interesting, because the EU recognizes that AI literacy should be a right for their natural persons who are EU citizens, is that a Department of Treasury should issue guidance clarifying that many AI literacy and skill development programs may qualify as eligible educational assistance as per their tax law code, which means that this can be one of the ways in labor law to, kind of helping people who are knowledge workers and otherwise who are people who are trying to adapt with AI, which is again not a bad idea per se. But again, that all also, I mean, this is something which a government can do, like a PSU can hold losses. So again, not a bad idea by the administration. Again, then I find something about discretionary funding, which is interesting, because they say, and this is one thing which is about AI and future of work, rapid retraining for individuals impacted by AI related job displacement. I kind of found it interesting that they already are thinking about that. Although my analysis, I did some analysis for my personal Substack after a long time. I don't think that the way displacement is we are thinking about is happening, because the best research we had was the IMF paper on AI adoption and AI in the future of work. They claim a lot that AI is taking away jobs, but then they can't even say what is the exact AI adoption curve. So, well, and if I make Bogdan speak, he will obviously tell how coders are getting more opportunities when the AI agent codes are failing. But I'll not get on that. And I'll quickly get on the China part later in Japan. So that is one thing which I found interesting. Then there's one emphasis which even the Chinese AI governance plan says is high quality data. It's already something which Raymond already knows, that high quality data is a concern everywhere. Interestingly, it's a concern in India as well. The India AI mission thinks that data quality matters. It affects certain things. So I think it's interesting how the government is thinking about it. Then the same for scientific data sets. I think that is interesting. While they're referring confidentiality protections, which is also interesting. Uh, we could not expect that from a Trump administration, but we saw that. Then again, investing and developing in foundational and translational manufacturing technologies, which is also interesting. But this is something which even Raymond might find interesting, which is about federally funded researchers to disclose non-proprietary, non-sensitive data sets which are used by AI models during the course of research. Well, how would they do that? What are the technical methods? What are the Is it just AI washing or not? I think that is something like greenwashing that needs to be seen, but that is also interesting. Um, and yes, they focus on frontier AI as well from a high risk AI literature perspective. Um, uh, they think from a national security perspective, but the reference of frontier AI has been very frequent in other parts. I took only certain parts because I found interesting and I thought relevant for this discussion. There's one person on LinkedIn who posted about this on LinkedIn. I can't remember the name, but full attribution to that person. Maybe we'll post the link in the final video when it's out. Raymond also commented on it, and I found some of the quotes interesting from the China part. So I'll come on it later, but I'll first discuss quickly the Japan approach. Now, with Japan, I think we saw something in the end of May that they passed an AI Promotion Act. And I also had analyzed in a monograph about the Japan AI governance market. I had said that Japan's Japan doesn't wish to have a definition AI apart like the EU, right? AI has a very tangible definition. Concepts like Bayesian differences and all those things come up, but Japan doesn't want to define it. But the AI Safety Institute is very interesting in Japan. So that is something which I found unique, that even if they don't wish to define AI, they come up with some principles and strategies, because they think that from an economy point of view, non-binding standards from government can be percolated to bigger market players. Maybe that's how they see it, because they literally say cooperative approach. Now, I think they're referring to private sector entities, which is why they keep referring that, yeah, it's a non-binding duty to cooperate, which is culturally interesting from a work culture point of view in Japan. If you look at Japan's cultural sensitivities, so it's an interesting approach. Not that binding, but yeah, you know what? Let's just do it. Let's just try it. It's a duty. Then enforcement mechanism is there. They focus on a reputational side of things. You know, which this thing that there should be a name and shame approach. Again, very Japanese. Which reminds me of a story. If you're anime fans, there's something called Gundam, right? The Transformers like robot that you know. So it turns out that a huge robot was formed, a huge figurine of Gundam was formed, which was like Bogdan might know it, a lot of feet tall. I can't even remember the number, but and it was going to work like a remote control robot. But there's a Japanese regulation which literally says that you cannot have such kind of applications run because first it's illegal, and it's illegal because it is very risky. So culturally speaking, that Japanese guy who actually built it, now it's in a museum. People go it for amusement reasons because they love anime and Gundam. But the guy wrote a clarification and he said that we find it culturally very risky and we feel apologetic. So maybe I think the duty to cooperate, this aspect is very interesting. It's a cooperative approach. Then again, they think of a national AI strategy headquarters, which everyone is thinking about. The UAE has an AI minister already. Um, Estonia already has a lot of approach on this. Some other countries are also trying. So I'm not going to just get on bureaucracy. Japan's approach is light touch, obviously. It's not something which is binding. How is it valuable for a larger Indo-Pacific region? Because Singapore does a lot of tech-infused approach. And India is also interested in DPI, digital public infrastructure, digital public goods. So in that sense, Japan is affirming a more proactive approach, and maybe Raymond might agree with me or not. I think Japan and Australia are trying to make AI governance hallmark in Asia a bit faster. I think faster and practical. But again, uh, antitrust issues are real, data outflow issues are real. How fast the government and their data protection regulators can handle that is something which will be a challenge because Japan has built upon the Hiroshima consensus of G7 under them. So that is what I see it. Now, quickly on China so that Raymond can add up. Um, on China, I think I found pretty interesting initially was about transnational open source communities, AI plus open application approaches. China also refers to high quality data. China also refers to UN Global Compact, which is again soft law and international law, a very non-binding approach. So, and the language is interesting. Inject more nutrients into the development because, well, it's a policy position. It's not a legal position. It's very metaphorical to use nutrients, but it kind of means that maybe they kind of think that high quality data directly affects the development of AI, which is again one of the good approaches or one of the more high thought approaches. Because if you see Eugenio Garcia's analysis and even the BRICS declaration, of which China and India are a part, BRICS leaders have also emphasized somewhere around these things. Um, although they said on AGI, which again makes no sense, but other things, yes, they make a lot of sense. So that's what I think about China. But I think this is one part which is about AI security governance, which is why I think that this terminology is very similar to how the Trump administration is thinking about AI safety right now. They also converted the AI Safety Institute of the Biden administration times to the AI Security Institute under NIST. So interestingly, the China and US actually kind of converge in it, I believe. But again, I might be a bit inaccurate on it. But to an extent, I think that there is some limited convergence because a lot of Chinese AI governance approaches, despite being unique for the four laws that China have, is actually pretty much emulated from the European AI safety thinking to some extent, not to a whole extent, because obviously the Chinese AI market is very, very interesting. It's led by China Mobile and certain other players. DeepSeek is a very small player, but the foundational models are still an obsession there, like it is in the US, in the Silicon Valley, and in New York and other places. So, considering that obsession, considering that approach, and the risk appetite that China usually has, I think they're focusing on prevention and response measures, which is very interesting. Incident response, is a very practical thing apart from data protection and AI governance. It's possible. It is tangibly possible in cybersecurity and AI as well. So you can do that. And therefore, security governance is interesting. They want to go classified and hierarchical management way. Well, fine. For high level AI systems like high risk AI systems, which are involved with critical data, yes, it's entirely possible. Um, that being that being said, um, one aspect is obviously about investment in tech research and development, and those things are very obvious. But I think US and China also agree on some aspects of interpretability because the Trump administration also pointed that out. So that's where I find the China and US approach converging. But I will let Raymond add on this because he has some nuance of interpretation which he can offer here. So Raymond, on the China part, I think you can maybe clear some more air. What do you think about it? Okay, maybe I must have missed something, but it's up to you.
Yeah, let me structure how I can start from this. I think I'll just go first the macroeconomic context, because that will also then help how policies are then crafted and interpreted. So I think compared to any other country in the world, China has China is actually quite advanced and mature in its AI adoption. So and I emphasize adoption rather than creation, because a lot of the AI technologies that the world uses are still very much US originated. But when it comes to actual adoption rates and implementation, yeah, like it's quite the statistics show that China is definitely leading that space. Given that for anyone who's actually been to China, every airport, every shopping center, like a lot of cities are by definition a smart city where things have been automated to often the fullest extent possible. In Shenzhen, we're already seeing self-driving cars and also now they're trialing flying taxis. Um, I don't think any other country has got to that implementation level. And this has already been taking place since like 2015, so very early on. So when it comes to generative AI, compared to other countries, China has already got a very strong foundation when it comes to policy making. So AI is not a new topic for them in terms of jurisprudence, right? So it's not a new policy area that maybe other governments are still trying to wrap their heads around. For China, it's just business as usual and just trying to adapt. So a lot of the Chinese regulations on AI have predominantly focused on recommendation algorithms, and largely because AI law in China and AI policy in China has been mostly back then an extension of content moderation and censorship laws. China is one of the countries today is quite sensitive to the whole censorship issue. The government the content does get controlled a bit more tightly in China compared to other jurisdictions. And so a lot of the when social media started popping up in China, um, big tech companies like WeChat, which is owned by Tencent, and you have like TikTok, ByteDance, all of that. Anything that's got to do with social media platforms will have to follow rules around how they craft their recommendation algorithms. And that has for let's say between 2017 and 2022, that was really the flagship point of Chinese AI regulation. Now, when generative AI came in, it was a matter of tweaking that recommendation algorithm to be able to accommodate for content generation. So you go from content moderation, just add an extra step, which is content generation. And so the next flagship law, which is China's administrative measures around deep synthesis technology and later generative AI. Now, I want to kind of briefly explain Chinese legal system because when I say law, I mean that generally, but in China, there's very different tiers of regulation, right? The highest law, constitution. Then below that is what we call the National People's Congress law. That's, let's say, equivalent to the US Congress statutes, right? They have to be created by the Chinese parliament, in this case, the NPC. Now, below that is what we call the actual regulations. But there are different types of regulations in China. You can have measures versus regulation versus like guiding measures. I don't know what's the English equivalent of that, but let's just call it guiding measures, right? And they all have different vary levels of bindingness, but they're all within the administrative branch. To use a Western analogy, these are like executive instruments. So far, China does not yet have an NPC statutory law. So we can't say there is AI law in China, but there are AI regulations in China, which is the administrative measures. So that's one thing to clarify. And the current policy debate in China is a question of whether these administrative measures should be now encoded into the NPC law level. That's a very nuanced discussion compared to, let's say, other countries who are still figuring out whether to regulate AI or not. China's already been regulating AI for many years already. So to them, it's more just about solidifying these regulations. But anyway, going back to generative AI, the generative AI measures and the deep synthesis tech measures, the latter is more about like deep fake generation. So it's synthetic data, synthetic content generation that falls under deep synthesis technology. These measures follow the same structure as the recommendation algorithm measures, being that you have an algorithm register where before you can even deploy your AI system to the public market that falls within the definitions of these regulations, you have to register to this register, and then you also have to go through pre-deployment security assessments. No other country does that so far in a binding level, not even the EU AI Act. The EU AI Act is based on self-assessment. So if you think you comply with the law, then yeah, that's great and then you only get caught if you breach and then the regulator comes at you. In China, it's the opposite. You have to go through regulator approval first before you can even put your app on the market. And I think since over the past 2 years, the key enforcer, which is the Cyberspace Administration, every quarter they release like 300 to 400 apps to the market that have been approved through this process. And all of these regulations follow the same structure, which makes it very easy for Chinese regulators to scale their laws. So a common challenge that Western jurisdictions have is when there's a new AI development, how do you then change the law to fit for that? For China, that's not so much an issue because they just copy and paste the same like template and apply it to that new AI development. So that's sort of the legal context. Now, getting into some of the more overarching policy, obviously China is like a great power within the world right now, and it's in direct competition with the US. And ever since the end of the Cold War, there's been very strong strategic tensions between US and China. And the US policy since I'd say like yeah, even since the Bush administration, or maybe not the Bush, maybe Obama. Since the Obama administration, there's been the whole U.S. pivot towards Asia, and as a result of that pivot, the containment of Asia, also of China, right? And that context has what led to various trade deals and also export controls. And really the export controls is one of the key manifestations of these tensions. Since the Biden administration, there's been progressive export constraints on semiconductor chips and also semiconductor manufacturing systems to China. And this has partly been a driver of China's drive towards AI sovereignty. So the whole catchphrase AI sovereignty has really been accelerated over the past few years. But has been especially pronounced in China because there is a sort of a survival existential significance to it. If for those who study Chinese history over the past 100 years, it was called a century of humiliation. China used to be the strongest dynasty, along with the Mughal Empire back in the day, and also the Roman Empire back in the day, like top three empires in the world, right? Unmatched in wealth and all that. But then, because the Chinese Empire was complacent with science development, technology, and then the Western powers then went to the China after the Opium Wars, and then a series of foreign colonization like that's still very fresh, at least in the government consciousness. So for the government perspective, self-sufficiency, especially in technology, is hugely important given the history. So when you read Chinese policy statements, the statements around sovereignty are often more overt and very ambitious compared to the same when you read to other countries' policies. And so when you have that in mind, this has driven a lot of there's been a lot of policy statements, press releases. They all come in different shapes and forms, but they all say the same thing, right? Self-sufficiency in every layer of the tech stack, not just the AI stack, but every stack, whether it be robotics, energy, internet, cloud, everything. So AI is not the its own it's not the head, it's just a limb of this broader tech sovereignty position. So when you have that in mind, the most recent AI action plan. So people call it the action plan, but the actual translation is more like it's global governance AI action plan. It's designed for the global audience in mind. And also, people have been aware China's also very focused on the Belt and Road Initiative, trying to connect West Asia all the way to Europe through basically reviving the Silk Road. And so a lot of part of that, the whole global south sort of thinking is also very strongly pronounced in Chinese policy statements as well as with the BRIC countries. And so language around inclusiveness is very much pronounced and almost at the same level as your typical words like safety, reliability, and security. Now, in this recent air action plan, um, when I read the actual text of it, I wasn't too surprised by the themes. Like these are things I expected, but one of the key things that it did uh, emphasize compared to previous statements is around open source. I think open source has become it has always been important in Chinese thinking, but it's been getting closer towards the center of Chinese AI policy ever since DeepSeek in early this year, which really showed the power of open source disrupting incumbent market structures, right? A lot of the Western AI companies had their stocks fall significantly in just one day because of this open source development. Obviously, that was only a short-term change, and markets have recovered since then. But that disruption really showed that the sort of the continuing tension between open source and closed source. And so and all of the Chinese companies now, unlike the US companies where only a few have released open source, in China, all of them have an open source alternative in addition to their closed source API. So it's the market expectation now to create open source, and the government is aware of that. But when they actually wrote the statement, it talks about sharing of open source resources with the global south. So it's very interesting that they only use the word open source resources and documents. But when I try to search the word open source software or open source code, none of that is mentioned in the policy. Now, I may be wondering, am I reading too deeply into the text? Well, the things about Chinese policy statements say you kind of have to read deeply into the language because which words are used actually tells 60% of the story compared to the actual message of the policy. And throughout the history of Chinese policy statements, you have to look at which phrases are being repeated throughout the body of the document. In in statements from like 6 to 2 years ago, the key words you will hear are safety, security, reliability. So pretty much like the very generic terms, very system focused. But now we're seeing terms relating to, as I said, inclusiveness and intelligent future, and also green future. So you see these words repeat a lot in Chinese policy, and now open source. But in Chinese, open source is very much caveated to only less technical documents, manuals, and interface documents, but it's not necessarily open source code or software. So and this is where academic view gets a split. Some people say, this is something maybe the government might not be too deeply aware of, and that Chinese open source code. So what I mean that open source models, code, open source weights will continue to spread within China and throughout the world. Or another alternative view is that actually this is a pivot now. There's now going to be less open source models and weights, but there'll be a continuing open sharing of documentation and journal articles and research papers. And some people are thinking that that might actually be a clever policy balance to ensure that China influences global standards, but also keeping the secret sauce within its borders. And standards are a huge battle between US and China. For those who know, the internet that the whole world relies on is built on standards that's driven by the US. And that has been often a huge area of concern by other countries because it's very much US driven consensus around how the tech should work. And so when it comes to AI, we're still kind of like a blank canvas as to who will control what standards. That's where China is really trying to take this opportunity to really have a stake in standards. Yeah, that's a long spiel of the current layout in China right now. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I also shared the Chinese AI governance plan on the screen just for the sake of it because we were actually getting on the points. But yeah, I think um, because a lot of analysis which still comes shows that when it comes to generative AI registrations or anything, I think I read this report and beyond that I think, well, I've said it before, and there's nothing wrong to admit it, that the whole deep seek phenomena around stocks in the US was connected to the risk appetite. But I think it was partially also about the hype of AI, at different levels in cloud and other things which might also have affected NVIDIA in different ways. So that's there. Um, so I think to add that up, of course, I think I'd like to take our pivot to industry perspectives and tech perspectives a bit. So we have, I think, the speakers for them as well. I have already introduced Dipanshu Singh. I've already introduced Bogdan. So if I am in a reasonable position, I think Dipanshu, Bogdan, if you are ready, maybe I think we can a little bit dive deep more because Dipanshu can give a lot of skill and diplomacy perspective and adoption angle from India as well, apart from what I gave on the India AI mission. But and obviously the skill side of things, and Bogdan obviously can maybe add up to a lot of things that you know Raymond mentioned. So maybe we'll have Bogdan first
The
for his explanation. But
um,
yeah,
two things, one is China related, one is everybody related. The China related is that there's a very huge, massive, tremendous misconception that the AI landscape in China is monolithic. It's not at all monolithic. It's very fractioned, in fact, very fractured, very disjointed. The competition is cutthroat, akin to Silicon Valley, maybe more, I don't know, but around that, they essentially kill each other for AI, like they do in Silicon Valley as well. Figuratively speaking, not shooting each other, you know what I mean. And there's just no alignment whatsoever. It just isn't. Alibaba does its own thing, and ByteDance its own thing, and all those guys are doing their own thing. Okay. Since AI law is not really a thing yet, they're doing not much thing which is illegal, right? You know, the fact that you don't abide by regulation doesn't make it illegal by default. It just doesn't. The only stick is that the party can whack the stick and you're out of business. That's basically it. Because they say, well, you're too dangerous, blah, blah, like any government in any country will do. They don't need laws all the time for everything to act. The other thing in China is that well over 20% is direct party, well, government, but actually it's parties through government involvement as stakeholder in the AI companies where it matters. I'm not talking, you know, this startup or that startup. No, not that. But in the companies that matter, it may be very big, it may be not, they may be not so big, but they have big potential which they deliver on. That's what I'm talking about. At least 22% of direct involvement as stakeholder. Stakeholder, not necessarily like I hold shares, I'm a stakeholder. That too, but not that. They have levers. They have levers in there. That's not the case in other countries. It's just not the case in other countries. I mean, maybe in few countries like Vietnam, I'm not sure, but most of the countries don't have that. So that's almost unique to China. Of course, I'm not comparing China to North Korea, right? China is like not North Korea. We know that. But that's so. So no alignment on AI across businesses, very huge variations across. Every does its own thing, but they do compete cutthroat with each other. And very substantial major direct party political and executive involvement as stakeholders in the AI companies that really matter. And again, it doesn't mean if it's a very big company, it matters more than a much smaller company. No, it's not really just about that. Is that what they're doing, what they reach, and what it really means for party policy, or could mean for party policy, what they're doing. That's basically what it is. So this is what I know about China. So 22% or maybe 25%, something around that. But 20 to 25% across the whole landscape. If you look at those particular companies, that's not 22%. It's much more than 22%. I don't know the percentages, but it's much more than 22%. And so the other thing, which is the everybody thing, is that one of the several cases, I assume one of probably many cases, of lawyers using ChatGPT and other, very unsafe and, insecure by design tech, GenAI tech like Claude and things like that, to just plead in court cases. And one of the lawyers was caught by the judge because it was so ridiculous. I mean, it was presented in a credible way, but the information was so ridiculous that the judge spotted not one, but I think like 5 or 6 made up cases by the lawyer, actually by ChatGPT, that the lawyer just used that verbatim almost to prove a point. They just didn't exist ever in no form or shape, like zero resemblance to reality, zero. It's not half of it existed, but not really in the same way. They just made up by ChatGPT, Claude, I think Claude it was. It doesn't really matter. They all work in the same way. And so the problem with that was, of course, apart from the obvious, that how the heck you can trust lawyers to represent you if they do these kind of things. It's that the lawyer got a $5,500 fine. Okay, which is what? I mean, I think the guy makes that in a week or less than a week. And they also discovered that the law firm was using that. Other people were doing the same thing at that law firm. In maybe smaller extent, but it was a practice. This was not, some guy that was lazy or didn't understand that they just wanted to, stand out and do work on so many more cases than others. It was a practice at the law firm. Okay, it was a practice, a way of working, to make up stuff. And so $5,500 fine. So the question here is why he didn't get, or she didn't, I don't know if he's a man or a woman, doesn't matter, a criminal record for that. Is it lying in court not a criminal offense? I think it is in almost every country in the world. Lying to the judge, keep the court in contempt. Okay. And you say, but I didn't know it was made up. Like what the heck? Even a bureaucrat will check the facts. So not knowing is not, and anyway, not knowing is not an excuse, right? If anyone here breaks the law by not knowing, that's not an excuse admitted in court, by the way. Why? because it's all published and you have reasonable doubt, you should ask and get help and this and that before doing stuff, right? That's not really considered a mistake or a genuine mistake. It's considered to be like you don't care. So $5,500 instead of a criminal record is just a slap on the hand. So now here is a question for the lawyers here. Abhivardhan, number one lawyer here, question is, why is that even possible? If anyone here will do something similar in their company at work while they work, would they be fired? Yes, most likely, because it's breaking company policy big time and they sign up on it and they're going to be fired, which is much more severe than getting that fine. I'm not saying that that fine is peanuts, but yeah, it's a slap on a hand. I mean, we're not talking people that make $5,500 in like a year, right?
Right,
Is people that make it in few days or a
right,
week
right.
tops. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the question is, how can we have AI legal frameworks where all these ridiculous things happen with peanuts penalties? It's already happening. How can we have an AI legal framework that doesn't address the core root of the problem, which is you don't have deterrence yet? But we talk about AI
But
sovereignty. Where is the sovereignty here? There's no protection.
yep. One point to quickly add on this, and I think I'll bring Dipanshu also because we have him waiting as well. And by the way, I think I would thank Sankalp, Francis Crawley for their comments, and Raymond is also participating. So of course we'll have Francis' perspectives as well. And Tamonash, I think we should document the comments as well in the final outcome document of this once I share it with Raymond. So Dipanshu, the point for you is, I think, to make it summarized, one thing is that, of course, on the adoption equation, it's pretty fast for a lot of countries. In India, it is not. In China, as Raymond and Bogdan discussed, it's pretty hilarious. They have a very unique approach, and so it's pretty hilarious and it's very fast. Of course, governance policies in India are not going to happen very soon. But um, even from a government to government perspective of approach towards AI adoption, AI inclusion, and AI integration and DPI, do you really think what cues can we find? Because of course you have joined the discussion, you have also been hearing. So what do you think about it per se? You know.
Thanks, Abhivardhan. Good evening, everyone. Sorry for joining a bit late. As you know, I'm kind of commuting right now, and it's very heavy rains in Delhi. And I think when we talk about AI, I think one of the biggest problems that we also need to solve is we still don't have very strong mobile networks despite 4G, 5G. I think maybe something that we can also work on in India is already, I think, in the pipeline is the 6G. But then I think China is already way ahead of us. So we still need to fix these problems because I had a little bit of patchy network in between. But nevertheless, uh, so I was listening to the interventions and comments of Raymond and then and I also actually across this incident of the lawyer, being reprimanded by the judge. So from the perspective of industry, so I just want to start with giving you an example, and taking further from what Bogdan mentioned, and then coming to the question asked by Abhi is uh, the idea behind is to increase productivity, right, of the worker. Um, instances within the organization, beyond the organization, through mutual friends and colleagues, where using AI is appreciated, but it is also not appreciated at some of the organizations. So, for example, what Bogdan mentioned is that the AI made up of few cases. And we have cases where some of these examples have been made up, have been made up. I think so. That is where Abhivardhan's question also comes into the picture. Is that trust factor is kind of missing, and that is where the adoption becomes a very big challenge among the masses. Of course, the visibility, the the adoption is a big elephant in the room. Is the trust, the verifiability factor? So I think if we work on something, if most of, and this is something for the AI companies, of course, they're figuring things out, is how do we increase that? How do we make systems less hallucinating, or how do we increase the trust factor? Whether there can be guardrails around it, around all of this. And I talk from the perspective of industry as well. So I've been working on the future of work, upskilling initiatives, and now I'm looking at a very important initiative where we are trying to upskill people and try and place them in countries where there is a declining age and increasing age and declining population like Germany, Japan. And what is happening there is that there's a lot of demand for workforce, but uh, am I audible? Yeah, I think I got disconnected. Yeah. So there's a lot of demand of workforce there. And what's happening is, as you know, India is now the world's largest populated country, and we have a huge workforce. But then the challenge with us is that workforce is not that much skilled. So how do we skill them up? Right, for the right job, that is the demand is there, and can we use an AI for it? So to give you a very crude example, like if I want to if I see a visibility of a job in Germany, and Germany of course is very much open to having Indians because of the talent and the skill, and one of the biggest factors, which was very interesting for me. So I spoke to the German ambassador, and he was very candid when he. So I asked him, "How do you see India in your whole scheme of things, and why do you think that the Indians are important to you in terms of future of workforce and AI?" So he said a very important point, I think, and that is something which is missing with the AI, and maybe it has to be figured out. Is Abhi, can you guess what did he say? He said empathy. Indians are one of the most empathetic people in the world. So that is one of the major reasons they want Indians in Germany, in Japan, because the way they connect to people. And when we talk about building AI systems, I think, of course, going to take a long time. Of course, there have been some tools which have been tested, but then how do we make the system? I mean, of course, it's a problem statement for something in maybe next 1 or 2 years. Is then how do we make the system more empathetic towards whatever the challenges that is thrown to it. So yeah, I mean, just to sum it up, the adoption part and the visibility part is a big challenge. And even though India ranks among the top countries where AI is being used, I mean, OpenAI has released it openly, and then I was seeing some data as well that the AI penetration is increasing, mostly because we have on an average, every Indian has 1.8. If you figured that out, almost on average, every Indian is having two mobile connections. So the internet penetration that happened after 2016 is a big factor beyond it. And having worked in the space of ed tech and skilling, and now in AI and then into policy, I would definitely say that the future stands for AI, and we are actively trying to work from the policy side as well. And recently, I and Abhivardhan had written a research paper also that got published on federalism and AI in India, and then probably we are going to work on some of this as well on skilling and future work. If Abhivardhan has time, then probably we'll write on that as well. So the idea is, of course, is that how do we increase adoption? So everything is fine. I mean, the hallucination, guardrails, everything is fine. But then how do we make it more acceptable for people, usable for people, and trustworthy is the point.
That's actually interesting because in AI diplomacy, the one thing which I've always said, and I think maybe Raymond has something to add on this is, and because I think we should now go on to the Q&A side because the comment section is firing up, and I really feel that Francis's wishes can unmute himself and comment because I think, and Ramanash and Priyanshi, since you're there, I think we should not document the comments in the final outcome document, okay? Because I think the comments are awesome. So, Sankalp and Francis, you're welcome to come in and add perspectives in the Q&A. We are starting in a few minutes. But one thing is there that with adoption dynamic, one which I realize is that there's something called citizen charter, which is basically about an awareness aspect. And I found it very interesting that in Indian governance, citizen charter is important everywhere at a grassroots level. Now, this is something which I kind of agree with the EU approach that maybe AI literacy, mandating it to a limited extent, is something which is inevitable and helpful. But then again, I think this can happen with public governance and private public partnerships. Again, that's a delicate game because in the right, I think we have Freedom of Information Act in the US, and I think in Australia we have similar legislation, common law countries. Will we strike that delicate balance again? But that's one of the ways I see it. So I think, and again, safety research is a very important part of diplomacy right now. I think amidst the Russia-Ukraine war, we had a situation where Ukraine, EU nations, Australia, if I'm right, I might be wrong, US under the Biden administration, they were involved in safety diplomacy, like all these AI safety meetings. And if I'm right, that happened post-Bletchley. Something happened in Hiroshima also under Japan. But well, that's about it for that. But yeah, uh, so let's bring the Q&A from the comment section to video. Francis, Sankalp, if you'd like to come on video, like unmute yourself, please. I think we can take some of the points. But yeah, please, I think it's great that we are having an awesome chat here. But yeah, I think Raymond, maybe I think your question for point was on AI Act of EU, and I think Francis was saying that it's basically kind of more co-opting for big tech companies in the US. But I think maybe one line we can summarize so that Francis can add up and respond, and then Sankalp can add up. So please, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Can you repeat that last bit, Abhivardhan?
No worries, no worries. So you were referring something about the binding nature of the EU AI Act, right? And Francis said it was not. So maybe you can summarize that in one or two lines, and then maybe Francis can add up because, maybe he can clarify a little bit more. Sometimes on text it isn't. So it's a very interesting perspective which both of you were discussing. That's why I thought.
Yeah, I think we were chatting about the AI sovereignty bit, and yeah, I agree. Like, I've made a distinction between the existence of policies and initiatives being implemented versus the actual outcome of these policies. There's a distinction between those two. I just, from my observation, it's really US, China, and the European Union actually having, like having progressed in implementing these policies on their way to promoting AI sovereignty. Now, whether any of them have a true sovereignty, that's a completely different question. But in terms of just who's doing things out there, these are the main three examples that I've seen so far. That's really what I was trying to clarify in the chat. That's all. Yeah.
So maybe Francis can add up on what he was trying to say on the sovereignty side, but yeah.
So sorry, my grandson just walked in the door and was talking about the lawnmower. Yeah, sorry guys, I was just having some fun in the chat here, but I think this is something to have fun with and not to take too seriously. The AI Act is no different than the GDPR. It represents not only the lack of power and authority, it also represents an enormous ineptness that people are able to exploit on the basis of diplomacy, but not insight. There are two train wrecks, just like the cocaine train wreck that the Europeans took to Kiev. It's no different, and no less than how von der Leyen and Costa were treated when they tried to tell the Chinese a few days ago how to run their country. So this is a failing power. This is a failing part of the world that even Africa now has woken up to and says, stop printing our money, stop taking our resources. And the real discussion on sovereignty is with indigenous nations or peoples. That's where the most fierce discussion is. We just had a meeting yesterday, data visitation and genomics. And there's a lot of people who pick up on that rhetoric, the Maui or US or Australians. Australians always like to say when they begin a conversation, first I'd like to give reverence to the fathers of this land. They name one or another tribe. I don't understand it, but I guess they do. I live in Belgium. I guess I should give reverence to the fierce Flemish tribes that drove off the Romans 2,000 years ago. But no, I actually think China has taken the most reasonable approach to AI. I think Raymond gave a really good summary of it. He understands it better than I do, that's for sure. You can read the language as well, which matters. And you know China better than I do. But China is pragmatic, and China will take its time. The US has very little legislation in AI. In fact, nothing really, nothing from Congress. So there's no legislation there. There's only a lot of rhetoric, first from Biden and now from Trump, and things that the presidential statement, something came out recently from Trump's thing. I have to look at that still. But it's all about sovereignty. It's 100% about sovereignty. If you look at the AU, it's 100% about sovereignty too, which is correct. The problem in Europe is it has nothing to be sovereign over. I mean, it has no AI. It has no big tech companies. So what it thought to do is, okay, we'll try to regulate these tech companies. And the US said, sure, you can regulate them. We'll tell you which regulations you should have. And just like it said, okay, we'll tell you, how we do tariffs. We get 0 tariffs and you get 15% or higher. So, and plus you have to buy your resources from us. You can't buy them from Russia, because if you bought them from Russia, Europe would get too strong again, and the US can't have that. So it is about sovereignty, but the question of sovereignty is a very legitimate question, especially within, let's say, a UN context. The UN is founded on the idea of sovereignty. It promotes always, first and foremost, the sovereignty of states, because it is a club of states, but it recognizes in the charter that it's not only the states that have sovereignty, but also the people, which China recognizes as well. Europe and the US don't recognize that, but China recognizes that the people have sovereignty and acts on that as well. And in the Declaration of Human Rights, which is a lesser legal instrument, it also recognizes that individuals have sovereignty. That is, there's a limit to the sovereignty of the people or the sovereignty of the state over the individual. So sovereignty is a fundamental element within our legal context. And I'm glad you mentioned the Belt and Road Initiative. I will be in Beijing in the beginning of September for a meeting of the Belt and Road Initiative. Maybe Raymond will be there, I'm not sure, 4 and 5 or something, September there. And we will have a session on AI and the SDGs, again, which is something China promotes quite a bit. So yeah, I happen to like China, but that's me. That's my problem. But I think that we just saw this was done so overtly in Europe. I couldn't even believe it. I'm on the working group for the implementation of the AI Act into the Code of Conduct or so. And we were told in the working group, firstly, they didn't care anything what somebody like me had to say, but we were told in the working group at the very beginning, we were told literally that the first draft of this was going to be drafted by the chairpersons. Some of the chairpersons, by the way, were from the US, from US companies even. And that it would be drafted by the chairpersons and by the 5 big AI companies in the US. That would be the first draft before we could even see it. So make no bones about it. The GDPR is the only, and the reason why there's self-assessment there is because that's the way the US governs its companies. It governs its companies through self-assessment. I'm not saying, I don't have a problem with that in a certain sense. That's a good way to do it. It could be. But Europe would never have gone down that road. But if you saw the problems that Europe had with, I forget his name, from Austria, but who twice, stopped the GDPR from working with the US. And the problem there was the self-assessment. That was the problem, and also access to Europe and other things there. I forget what that's called. You guys know. But anyway, I think that no, I don't think Europe is a player at all. I really don't. But it has. I mean, the GDPR. You saw countries like Japan implemented it into its legislation. You saw Brazil implemented into its legislation. You saw the Philippines implement the draft. What a disaster that was. It implemented the draft GDPR into its legislation. So, of course, I will say Europe is very interested in its sovereignty. We see this in these 15 or 16, which will eventually be 25 or so, data spaces that it's creating, because it wants to have sovereignty over data, and that's why it's creating these data spaces. And that means, of course, sovereignty over data, sovereignty over AI. But it doesn't have the data. Its data all goes overseas. I live in Leuven. It's 20 kilometers from Brussels. So I know all my data. The first thing it does is it travels to the Belgian security agencies in the evening. They download it, and then they ship it over to the US. And that's basically what happens. And that is why the GDPR is there. And the GDPR gives everybody this wonderful idea that you have control over your data, because every time you open a website, you have to click I consent to something you have no idea about, absolutely no idea about, in order to live in a democratic society, so to speak. So that's all the GDPR has done, has really enforced on European citizens to consent to sending their data to the US.
I think that's something which I think it's a very interesting exposition, because I've read the Brussels effect and another Bradford works, and I think I relate with that. So I think it's quite unique. But I'll let Sankalp add quickly, because we need to have a head start to conclude. I think there's some interesting points that we came to, and I will come up with a conclusion. Raymond added a lot, obviously, because we did it jointly, but I think the speakers added a lot as well. So,
Yeah.
Sankalp, last exposition from your end, but the floor is yours.
No, sorry. I mean, this has been very interesting. So basically, the thing is that we started off with talking about China and Australia and the Quad. We moved to Europe. And what's interesting is Europe's GDPR regulation was accompanied by national efforts across the world to it was led by organizations and individuals who are advocates of privacy. And that ultimately led to so we occupy that space similarly in AI, where we're trying our best to Abhivardhan's been leading his initiative, Raymond, and the others. Everyone's trying their best. So there's what I took away from this entire thing was that like China is now, like, the document that was shared, like, it was very interesting because China is now trying to like put in an international standard, right? So on the other side of it, US has access to like most of the AI sovereignty. Like it has a lot of AI sovereignty because of the companies, and like has access to data, and it has, like, let's say, the standards regulated there because internet was invented in US. And look at like, let's just take a step back and look at where all this is happening organically. It's happening on the internet, right? And the internet is something most of which is censored in China. So like, there is going to be a tussle, I think, if China tries to step in with an international standard, because a lot of this happens over the internet, and a lot of this happens with indigenous data points which stem from discussions. Yeah. So this is what I wanted to say. Like this is going to be a tussle between dissenting actors, and like how states are, like, enabling environments in them. Like I thought China was facilitating a lot of innovation through this framework which Raymond described. And yeah, that's my quick thoughts.
No, that's great, and it will be documented, I promise. But we'll have a headshot, of course. But Bahadur, if maybe 1 minute, then I will have to conclude. So 1 minute, please, since you raised your hand, please.
Yeah, sure. So hi everyone. Really nice to meet all of you. And we just had this discussion with Bogdan and Raymond, Dipanshu, about Chinese and Indian perspectives, right? And how the Chinese basically regarding open source facilitating open source developments and everything. And you also mentioned how like documentation and that would be the technology being open sourced. But like Bogdan raised is that issue with like governmental involvement at every level of these Chinese companies, and this the real risk regarding about trust of adoption, right? So say with DeepSeek, we had this huge issues regarding censorship, or how information itself is presented. So regarding like even the international collaboration, so how China is positioning itself as this kind of the next the kind of alternative uh, for US technologies. My question would be, what value would Gen AI from China exactly have when it's kind of mind melding like political perspectives about like Chinese like how the Chinese government works, and their model of sovereignty. What exactly they be exporting to the world? And like I feel like democratic country like India, I mean, it's a flawed democracy nonetheless, but democratic country which is much more well placed in the like Western society right now, in a very middle multipolar sense. I feel like India has a really good like it's in a really good place to offer different models of sovereignty, considering its diversity and indigenous perspectives. So that's my takeaway from all our discussions, and thank you very much.
That's great. I think we had a really fascinating discussion. To conclude quickly. And yes, I think we need people for headshots as well. Um, I'll say that I think this discussion has been interesting because we started with the facets of LLMs. We started with the facets of how these governance plans of India, China, US, Japan, and Australia actually have a sense of convergence, and what convergence they don't have. I think the objective of the session is achieved. I think Raymond and I tried to blend into that, and I think everyone has added in their own way. So, and I think industry perspectives and some interventions by some of our friends and some of our colleagues at ISAIL were actually helpful. But I think we'll come up with a final outcome documentation on this. Um, but last words to Raymond quickly for 1 minute. What does he feel about it? And I don't know if we'll do it again, but maybe we should. But last word from him, and then I think we'll just ask everyone for a headshot and stop the recording. But yeah.
Was that, sorry, did you direct to me, Abhivardhan?
Yeah, like last words. What do you think of the overall session per se? That's all. Just maybe
Yeah.
a quick question.
No, I think it's great that we're going into the macro issues. I really appreciate Francis's sort of inside knowledge of being involved in, the actual working groups of the EU GPI code of practice. I think that's a very rare insight that we've all learned. So just really appreciate your insights, Francis, and also having a very realistic view of the world, and also everyone else here who, especially I'm sorry if I mispronounce your names, but Bahada and Deepanshu, and also yourself, Abhivardhan, and also Sankalp, with just providing those local insights from the Indian perspective. That stuff I really appreciate. That's the real reason why I like to connect with everyone here, just to really learn, the other side of the world that I myself, haven't had the chance to expose myself to visit India. I'd love to do it one day and just learn the mindset and the culture. And so for now, until then, this is a great way for me just to really open my mind up and just really embrace, all these amazing viewpoints around the world. Yeah, that's what I wanted to share.
That's great. I think we had a great session, and I'll ask speakers and people who intervene and even otherwise, if you wish to be a part of this group photograph, you can open your camera. That's up to you. 6 people are here. But where is Bogdan? Bogdan, you should come. Yeah. Okay, come on.
I just wanted to add that Raymond, you pronounce my name absolutely perfect. I mean, I don't think so that it was like on top notch, like on the spot. So yeah.
Awesome, thank you.